Good morning, McTimmy. Hope you're doing well, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Jump in here. P-Man Van, again, getting up early, doing great. Are you part of the 4 a.m. club now, P-Man Van, or the 5 a.m. club? I was usually a 4 a.m. club guy, but lately I've turned into a 5 a.m. club guy. Don't know how that happened. Good morning. Good morning, team. Good morning. I kept the same board today. We're not going to be using the board. I just like the picture, so it's still in the news. Boo Boo Bodacious, good morning. Signed in to be counted. Nice, Boo Boo. Nice, nice, nice. Morning, morning, Bitcoiners. Morning, bud. Hope you're doing well. Well, if you weren't aware, the sun rose this morning, just as it always does. And I checked, and those blocks are coming in every 10 minutes. We're doing good. Let's have a coffee and talk about all the other stupid stuff in the fiat world. Tastes like a surge of confidence in the banking system. A surge, I tell you. Shalom, indeed. Indeed, Kevin. Yes, indeed, the fiat hucksters have been up to their best, and they say nothing to worry about with the Deutsche Bank. Don't worry about it. And it looks like, how much is it now that the banks have borrowed from from the Fed? It looks like they've got $120 billion in deposits in the past week. The 25 biggest banks have got $120 billion in deposits. This is a good job, guys. You're doing great. I know why everyone's so confident now. I get it. I get it. Now, as you know, on the show, we like to start every one of our mornings off with the fakest news we can find. And today is one of those days where we got to go back to MSNBC and the cope with the lack of indictment for Trump this week is causing some trouble over there. So good news is they have other content they can release related to it. So it's not just that. So here's if you're into MSNBC, here's what you got. You got as if Donald Trump didn't have enough legal troubles, the $250 million civil fraud case against him, his businesses, and his 3 kids is advancing. Well, that's good news. You don't have to. It's not just the fella from New York that wants to arrest him. There's other people. It's good. There's more stuff out there. Oh, but there's also this one, right? Because this one's important. This is also there. The seeming stop and go schedule of the Trump hush money case has led to confusion, but simply there's no reason to think this week's events means that Donald Trump won't be indicted. Come on, there's no reason to believe that. And if that's not enough, you have one more. All right, so MSNBC getting all the bases covered. Trump seems slow to react to the rapid developments in the Mar-a-Lago case, but his sluggishness might be strategic. Remember that the Mar-a-Lago was the other one where he had nuclear secrets and they raided his home. And then there was a counter to it where Biden had some documents in his car and his garage. We don't hear about the documents in the car anymore. That's the Corvette. It's next to my Corvette. That's all forgotten. But here we go. We got 3 chances to get him. So good for MSNBC. They got a full scope there, right? They got a pretty full scope. Now, as you know, we like to contrast all of this interesting clown world news with what's going on in the Bitcoin world. And one thing the Bitcoiners are talking about this morning is Chamath Palahaptia. So I've known Chamath for a little while. I've met him a few times. I was supposed to interview him. He's dropped out of every interview I've ever had booked with him. He just drops out. So the first one was in 2017. I had him booked for the really one of the most special Bitcoin events I've ever been involved in, which is the day Bitcoin hit $10,000 a coin, 10,000 US dollars a coin. That was just after US Thanksgiving in 2017. And by luck and circumstances and a dart I threw months before, it hit on the big day. And we had an amazing crowd there. It was the first time we had Arthur Hayes talking about Bitcoin on American soil because BitMEX had just started to take off. We had Tur Demeester there. We had Willy Woo there. We had all kinds of great Bitcoiners. We even had, believe it or not, I had Raoul Pal as a bear in a debate about the Bitcoin bulls and bears. He was a bear at the time, and he made a valid point that I think most Bitcoiners would get behind, which is that the altcoins had diluted Bitcoin's limited issuance. And I think that's a thread that a lot of people don't realize. Raoul Pal was one of the first people to get involved in that. Everything changed afterwards. And Raoul, I still appreciate, for example, he did an amazing series on the fourth turning in 2019. I used Real Vision for that. I still find some good content in Real Vision from time to time. But anyway, so he was there. We had all kinds of great people. Chamath was supposed to be our end of day keynote, but it turned out his wife was leaving him and he had a new affair going on, and the romance and the this and the that. Those were rumors. I don't know if they're all true. But I think it's been confirmed now that he had some big time marital trouble. So, I got over the bitterness of him not coming that time. I had him booked again to interview him in 2021, and he canceled at the last minute again. So I've missed out on actually meeting Chamath and interviewing him and doing all that stuff. But nevertheless, I've still had an appreciation for some of his takes over the years. I think he's a brilliant guy. He's a Canadian like me, by the way. And I always wanted to just talk with him and connect with him because we both went to university in Waterloo, Ontario. He moved to Silicon Valley after. I was all over the place, but we still had that in common, and I always wanted to mention it. He was there a little before me, but nevertheless, we didn't quite overlap, but it was a similar background and similar world and all the rest of it. So Chamath was one of the earliest Bitcoiners, in fact, and you got to give him credit for that. He had amazing predictions in the early days. But Chamath yesterday said one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in a podcast or anything. So let's give Chamath a lot of credit, first of all, for what he's got right in his life, early to Bitcoin. People actually sharing a video with him. If you're on Twitter at all today, you'll come across it. It's Chamath 9 years ago going on about Bitcoin and how important it was. Chamath was one of the earliest people to, let's say, orange pill a lot of Silicon Valley. He was there at the start. He was saying what an amazing thing it was, how awesome it could be, and all of that. So we got to give Chamath credit for that. But here's what he said, right? He said on his interview yesterday, or in the All In podcast yesterday, and they had Nick Carter on it. They were talking about choke point and what's going on with on-ramps and off-ramps with Bitcoin. And Chamath said these words out loud. He said it in public on a show that millions of people, I think, watch. I don't know if it's in millions, but it's got a pretty good audience. And he says, we are just starting to uncover how the financial infrastructure is broken. What? What? It might be one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. We are just starting to uncover. Now, I understand. I do this show, and I'm sure if you went and if I had millions of people talking about what I said on my show every day, I'm sure you'd find stupid things too. Right? I'm sure I've said things that make no sense in context, because speaking live as we do this show, and I'm not sure if his podcast is recorded. I never would watch it live. I barely watch the All In podcast. I take reactions and what's going on the outside. It's not really my thing. Respect everyone there, even Jason Calacanis, who had everything wrong when it came to politics in 2016 and 2020. In some sense, people like him are responsible for this because they still cast politics in 2016 and 2020 in terms of good guys and bad guys without understanding the system itself was corrupted and we needed alternate ways of seeing it. So Jason Calacanis had a really interesting blog. I reached out to him many times to speak at our shows, and I wanted to get him politically out there to say stuff, but wasn't that great. So do respect him, though. Did think he was one of the few people who had Trump derangement syndrome that still had useful things to say. David Sachs, on the other hand, I've mentioned him many times on the show. I had that wrong. And he was another speaker that I should have prioritized to book. He did speak at our show a couple of years ago. I did not interview him, but I still created the program. I just didn't cast him right. He was not very politically forthright before 2020. So he wasn't really coming out with what he really thought. He was coming out with some stage managed type quotes, and he was more VC than ever. he wasn't really engaged in the freedom of speech argument as much as he is now. So I've admitted on this show 100 times. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made in programming events is getting David Sachs wrong, and I can still remember his EA saying like, well, because I hadn't really figured out where to put him, and I wasn't that enthusiastic about it, and I still remember his EA sort of berating me, like, what, come on, where's the stuff? And I was like, well, it's not, I didn't tell her, but at the time it wasn't a priority to me. And boy, did I have it wrong, because David Sachs to this day remains one of the most impressive VC types that I've ever seen. Right. So, and if you're not following David Sachs, if you don't look at what he has to say about every single issue, he's now become probably the most important voice for peace in America. Right. So that's how wrong I got it. So predictions are important. We get some wrong sometimes. I got it wrong. I've shared it on this show 100 times how wrong I had David Sachs. Chamath, on the other hand, is a different story, right? So when he comes out here and says that we're just starting to uncover how the financial infrastructure is broken, it's stupid, because he knew about it years ago. He knew about it years ago. And to come to the issues that we have today with the American banking system, and to be like you're wiping out the sleep from your eyes and you're saying, oh, this is new. Wow, what's going on here? Is fake news, right? It's misleading and disingenuous. And Turdemeester mentions this. He says, nonsense. Cypherpunks were always deeply informed about the unsustainable nature of the fiat economy. To illustrate, he brought some slides presented 10 years ago at the Amsterdam Bitcoin conference. Indeed, I remember these slides. And he says, how could Bitcoin maximalism, and this is what the other thing that Chamath is getting roundly criticized for. So it wasn't just that he said, oh, we're just starting to learn about the troubles in the system. Oh, we're just starting to learn that the financial system doesn't work as intended. And this is what he said about what's going on. He says, we need to dial down a little bit of the Bitcoin Maxi stuff. It distracts from a really important set of topics that are more inclusive and actually touch 7 billion people. And Dylan LeClaire from Bitcoin Magazine says, like rug pull SPACs and Solana. Brad Mills says the same. What a confused and hypocritical person Chamath turned out to be regarding why any of this matters. He never understood Bitcoin, still doesn't. He's a hustler, doesn't care who is on the other side of his grift. Mr. Below My Line is inclusive now. Wow. Below My Line was him, if you don't know, this is the other time he said something pretty dumb, right? Pretty dumb. And he was talking about the Uyghur genocide in China. Now, again, we should be very hesitant to believe American talking points, especially when they come from the censorship industrial complex and are sponsored by whatever war machine you can name in America. We should be very suspicious when they say, oh, China baddie because genocide, right? We've seen this trick before. Now, it seems independently confirmed, especially when it comes to the organ harvesting stuff. So I'm in no way here telling you to ignore what China's doing to Uyghurs. That's not the point that I'm making. I'm giving Chamath a little bit of wiggle room and saying, maybe not exactly. Maybe not exactly. However, it's been confirmed by people who understand Jiang Zemin's role and the history of persecution of the Falun Gong, right? The Falun Gong. Apparently, the entire police state that Jiang Zemin ran before he died was focused on Falun Gong and removing them as political opponents. But that apparatus was then turned onto the Uyghurs after, and the organ harvesting and everything comes from there. According to many people, none of whom I can reference so directly that I couldn't ever claim to be someone who knows exactly what's going on the situation. I find it credible when people say this is happening, that there is a type of genocide going on in China, and it involves these people. So, and what Chamath said at the time was, when someone was complaining, oh, the Chinese Uyghurs got troubles in China, he goes, it's below my line. I don't care, right? It's not a big enough issue for me to care. And they were talking about it in the context of the economy and all that other stuff. So that was the other time he said something really dumb on the show that got a lot of criticism, and you don't really see what the angle is here, right? Like, what's he trying to do? Like, is he trying to defend China? Maybe. Is he actually trying to oppose the U.S. Media system that would blanket and form people's thoughts and persuade people to dislike China because it has this weaker thing. That wasn't the context, right? That's something David Sachs would say. His context was literally, I believe China is going to grow economically, and I don't give a shit about this human rights stuff. It's never going to hold them down. And maybe he's right. Maybe he's right. But to say it out loud the way he said it, I think underlines that, he's probably not the most careful speaker, which is fine. And that might be the excuse for why he said something so stupid regarding Bitcoin here. But I think Brad Mills has it right. His other logic here was that Bitcoin should have ripped in response to the banking crisis last week. And then Dan McCurdle says, well, it went from 19,000 the day before the SVP, the Silicon Valley Bank seizure, to 2,800, $28,900, so almost $29,000 on this week. So that's 48% rise in 12 days. And Chamath just isn't paying attention, is what Dan McCurdle said. And indeed, he might not be, right? He might not be. He's got all these other things going on and all that. But again, to double back onto this like inclusive thing, right? It's inclusive. Neil Jacobs asked, what's more inclusive than Bitcoin, right? What is more inclusive than Bitcoin? So going back to what Tur said, right? He says, how could Bitcoin maximum distract from a really important set of topics when it is in fact a carefully constructed answer to the systemic problems the cypherpunks have been aware of and preparing for since the 1990s? So remember, he showed the research that he has, and that's something that I mention all the time on this show. One of the main advantages Bitcoiners have is that we made predictions years ago. Years ago, we made predictions. And those predictions are becoming true day by day. We're coming closer and closer and closer to the end game that Bitcoiners have been describing for over 10 years now. So when Tur says this is a presentation he gave about Bitcoin contrasted against the fiat banking system, his conclusions of 10 years ago, this research that he has, he's talking about the Deutsche Bank leverage. He's talking about the maturity mismatch that can arrive with bond issuances and any kind of flexibility that they afforded interest rate hikes. So everyone has said for a long time, go see what happens if you hike interest rates. You're going to have calamity because you can't just do it like that, especially not as fast as it was done. And so we're always contrasting that idea that Bitcoiners have researched stuff, they have made predictions, and we are more or less on the timeline, consistently on the timeline. Every year that goes by, we are closer to the final stop. But even the stations along the way, Bitcoiners have predicted that it would look like this first, it would look like that after, and we would arrive at some point that looks like the choke point issue that Nick Carter is talking about and that Balaji is talking about, that the irredeemability of Bitcoin was going to come to America to protect the fiat system. Now, we're not quite there yet, but if you look at FedNow and these other things, we're getting there. So, and even if you guys didn't know Chamath's background, he's not an engineer, right? He went just like, most people think Waterloo, Ontario. If you don't know, if you're American, and of course you don't care about Canadian universities, who would? Waterloo is kind of like our Stanford, if you will. It's like an engineering school, but they got other programs. I did not go to engineering school there. I was more into liberal arts and those kinds of things. At the time, I had already done a science degree in Quebec in junior college, which is our CEGEP. It's called Collège d'études générales et professionnelles. So that means College of General and Professional Studies. It's a copy of university, except 2 years. The same schedule. By copy, I mean you have midterms and finals. There's no attendance. There's none of that stuff. It's up to you. We start when we're 16. We graduate when we're 18. The 2 years of junior college end up counting as 1 year of university or American college. So we don't have 4 years. If you come from Quebec, you don't go to undergrad college for 4 years. You go for 3. So if I would go to McGill, or even when I went to Waterloo, I only had to go for 3 years to graduate. You get a 4-year degree in 3 years because you get a year credited. So I had a year credited of science stuff, math, and all of that stuff. So Chamath went to work for a bank. He was a trader. He was a long leverage, short leverage, that kind of stuff, derivative trader. And he worked for a Canadian bank, Bank of Montreal. And that's how he found his way into Silicon Valley somehow. I don't know every part of his background, and I'm sure his actual training is larger than trader or whatever it is exactly. He made his big break by taking that experience at the Bank of Montreal and whatever other bank he worked for, and was one of the early VCs that got way in on Facebook. That's how I knew him. The owner of CoinDesk was one of the people that helped people like him sell shares in a thing called Second Market, which was bought by NASDAQ later. But that's where Twitter, engineers, staff, anyone who had an early allocation as an employee needed a venue to sell that stuff to people. And that's where Barry Silbert made a lot of his money that he put into Bitcoin after, was this thing called Second Market. So it allowed Twitter shares to get liquidity before they had been publicly offered, before the IPO and public offering of Facebook and Twitter and those things. They would go to Barry in New York and be able to distribute their own shares and find buyers. And that's how Chamath knew him, and that's how I got in touch with Chamath, and how I got Chamath to be involved in the event years ago, 2017, when I had him there. So what's important to understand is for him to come out and say that we're just learning about this stuff, it's all new. Now, I'm not predicting it. I'm not saying it's nefarious or anything like that. I'm just saying it's stupid. It disregards everything he said before. And indeed, what is important here, and the point I'm trying to stress, is that predictions do underline your accuracy of your worldview at the moment you make them. So if you make an accurate prediction, you can actually, and then it happens, you can go back in time and say, well, what I thought of then was pretty accurate. It was a pretty accurate description of reality. Oh, by the way, descriptions of reality. Let me mention that the Y-Files yesterday did a excellent new edition on out-of-body experiences. And weirdly, I had just come across the same report. So physically I had it, and I've been trying to find a way to put it on the board for you guys, because it's the brain drawings that I like, but it's brains plus simulation theory and how it could all come together. So anyway, go watch that show. I'm going to try and figure out how to get the graphs, because he actually hand drew them, and they look like they would fit in my board. So I had them for a while. I've been trying to get them, find a way to do it. It's complicated stuff. If you watch the Y-Files from last night, Hecklefish has to constantly pardon how complicated the subject matter is. So I've had that file for like 2 weeks now. I didn't even realize it existed and before that. And I've been trying to find a way to work it into the content here. But funny that he did it. We were just talking about him yesterday, and then the show he did ended up being something that I was working on for this show just a few weeks before. So simulation wink. And it is literally about the simulation. So it's also funny. But that's what I mean. These predictions that are made when you make them, right, have a lot to do with how accurate your worldview is at the time. And you can see the consistency of that worldview by it being able to predict. So predictive models are useful and can continue with you, and you don't discard them if they continue to accurately predict what the future looks like. That's what makes a good predictive model accurate predictions, right? That's obvious. So for him to come out and say that, right, I think it ends up highlighting that Bitcoiners have understood this stuff much better than financiers and Wall Street people and traders like Chamath for years now. Because when people would tell me, oh, Bitcoin's too volatile, right? I'm one of the original analysts in Bitcoin. Like the job didn't exist when I started doing it. There was no such thing. We had to invent it ourselves. Tur is one of the first, and I used to talk to Tur about this kind of stuff all the time. Pierre Rochard would be another, who I talked. He just emailed me this morning about the show. I worked with Pierre at Kraken for a little while. There's only a handful. Spencer Bogart, who works for one of these VC firms in Silicon Valley. There was only a handful of people doing it, and everyone kind of knew each other. I did it because I didn't know what else to do, and I was more of a writer than I was a financial analyst, in that I would write reports, but they were related to the banking system because I was trained in law. I had some experience in how to do sophisticated graphs and sophisticated statistical work. So I was not ignorant to it. I had to develop that as I went along in the Bitcoin space, but it was still something that was new to the world and whatever. So when people criticize Bitcoin for being volatile, I'll tell them this, and I've said it on this show before, and I mention it all the time. Okay, well, if we're volatile, maybe on price you can see some volatility, but what about on forecasting and predictions? Because every single forecast and prediction ever made on Wall Street pre-2020, throw it in the garbage. It's all garbage. It doesn't make any sense anymore. The money changed. The nature of the market changed. The integrity of the market changed. And it's a different market now, whether it's the inflated denominator of the US dollar, new regulations, new global forces, all of it is different. So actually, any piece of research that someone like Chamath did 10 years ago, or someone who had the same profession as Chamath before he became a VC did, everyone on Wall Street, every researcher, every analyst on every asset in every field in every market is garbage. Sorry, not the analyst, the work, right? The things they produced, garbage. It can't, it doesn't mean any, it doesn't predict anymore. There's no predictive quality within any of that research whatsoever. None. And so when I talk about volatility to people, or when people talk to me about Bitcoin volatility, I usually go to that. I say, well, volatile, maybe if you focus on numbers, but we're not talking about math here. we're talking about an ability to see reality and predict where that reality is headed. So Chamath's math is waking up to this idea that we are just uncovering that financial infrastructure is broken. Well, not exactly, because our research says it's been broken for a long time, and we predicted this. We predicted it. We predicted where we are. And you have to give credit to those who have managed to predict things properly. And you have to admit that if the framework is about forecasting, which is the point of all the research on Wall Street, what is the point of the research on Wall Street? To find out what happened yesterday? Do you think anyone gives a shit on Wall Street what happened yesterday? Do you think anyone in finance cares about what happened yesterday? They want to know about tomorrow. That's how they make money. So the whole point is to forecast. The whole point of the research is to forecast and predict where things are headed. And if it is about volatility, remember that every Bitcoin analyst who operated 10 years ago understood the problem of today exactly, 100%. What we are experiencing today, all Bitcoiners who were working in our little offices back then, in 20, just after Tur came out with this, and we had our first office in New York for CoinDesk, it was a WeWork that really should have only had like 2 desks in it, and we fit 4 or 5, and we were clanking away at stuff and trying to produce stuff and publish stuff, and it was a totally different world, right? But we were right. So all the people down in the Wall Street offices, none of their work stands. It's all garbage. Where Tur can pick up a 10-year-old presentation he gave at an event on Bitcoin in Amsterdam, similar to the show that Bitcoin Magazine put on last year, which is the second biggest, or the second most relevant. It's the biggest show ever in Europe, the one we did last October. But these are the biggest sort of shows that we've had on Bitcoin in Europe in history. So the one 10 years ago, Tur's research is still good. I mean, I'm reading it here. It all still makes sense. He's talking about exactly where we lie today. The headline of his presentation is Monetary Darwinism, Bitcoin versus Fiat in the Coming Financial Crisis. And he predicts the financial crisis exactly, right? So remember that Bitcoiner predictions and getting it right are a valuable tool, and describe that we understand the world we were in 10 years ago, and probably, oh, sound gone? Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be gone, guys. Let me know if it's gone. Good. So that's Tur. Now, if you are wondering, right, how this kind of messaging and how this kind of stuff percolates. Sorry, guys, I got some kids running around for ballet. We got our recital today for the kids, so it's going to be a fun time for them. I'm going to try and make it up to their show. They're saying goodbye to me right now. It's their last day at ballet today. And parents are allowed to go watch them dance. And they got to go a little early. Just a second. We'll be right back with you, team. Let me have a sip of coffee. Huh? Let me have a sip of coffee. Good, Bushmaster. I'm glad it's back. Yeah, I don't know what it was. Ranmore says, congrats. Thank you. Thank you, Ranmore. Kids are happy. I'm going to try and get up and see them. We have some event stuff to do. Yeah, definitely a proud papa, man. We got some stuff, though. I got some work I got to get done this morning before I call it a day on Bitcoin 2023, May 18th to 20th. I got some programming stuff. I got some names to put in from Pierre Rochard that he just mentioned. He has the very interesting congressman. I want to make sure I get his last name correct. Yeah. Leave it here. Byron Donalds. Yeah, I saw Daniel got his ticket yesterday. Amazing, Daniel. I can't wait to see you, man. We're going to do a live show at the event. Um, so Pierre might be interviewing Byron Donalds, the congressman, who has had really interesting things to say, and they've been chatting a lot together. So it could probably be a pretty interesting talk. I originally had Pierre talking about ordinals, but I think the tension around that is sort of diffuse, and Pierre would have a more interesting conversation. So, but here's the financial infrastructure part that becomes apparent or important about why you should listen to the people who predict correctly versus Chamath, who's got these predictions where it's like, oh gosh, what happens? We're just finding out, right? So he had Nick Carter there talking about the Operation Choke Point and how it looks more and more like off ramps around fiat to Bitcoin are getting closed in America. And it's exactly what Balaji is ringing the bell about. It's exactly what people have predicted for a long time would happen. You've got Doomberg here today talking about gold and handcuffs, right? Comparing exactly what's going on with the gold market and Bitcoin, and choke point being a thing that happened in the 1930s in America in order to begin this process of making fiat ubiquitous and not having an off ramp that FDR imposed during the Great Depression. So, which really set the stage for Bretton Woods and then set the stage for America decoupling from gold convertibility in 1971. So, here he's saying gold in handcuffs. And what you get from this is a Doomberg article. What you end up actually understanding from this is that it looks like these off ramps could be closed. But what I understand from the gold market already is that it was heavily manipulated, that it's been heavily throttled in its ability to be an actual counterweight to the US dollar, and that the market itself has had trouble over the years. So when you start thinking about it in that way, you start to realize that fiat's real power is in language. And that's what makes it such an atrocity that someone like Chamath is speaking the way he is, right? Oh, you need to quiet down, Maxis. Oh, we just found out about some financial infrastructure trouble, and it's not inclusive what you're talking about, right? It's not inclusive. Now remember, the censorship industrial complex, which is an important aspect of the fiat system, because again, boil it down to what it is. Fiat are words, they're decrees, they're declaration. The force and momentum behind fiat is words, right? And we've been having a laugh here that the people that are trying to carry and propagate the words that prop up the US dollar are Janet Yellen, Joe Biden, and face touchy Jerome Powell. So we're in a world where we have some of the weakest promoters, the weakest interlocutors, the weakest and least charismatic people we've ever seen in those roles. They have zero power of persuasion when they speak. I mean, Janet Yellen is the opposite of persuasion. She's repulsive, and Joe Biden is also repulsive. These are repulsive people. And I don't mean that in one specific way. I mean, if Joe Biden, some smelly old man who can't make a sentence, was trying to argue with me, I would find it boring and I would be repulsed and would want to walk away. You can't engage with someone whose mind is so weak and fragile. And Janet Yellen, exactly that, is another person who doesn't seem to say anything besides a scripted point of view. And if you saw what she said when she was being grilled the other day about bank consolidation in America, the most obvious question that could have been posed to her was, what if banks consolidate? She's there to testify in front of Congress, and she looked like she had never even heard that was a complaint. Like it was the first time someone said, "What do you think about bank consolidation and the problems?" And she acted as if she was never heard of the question and was completely unprepared for the only question she should have been prepared for the meeting. So we're dealing with some heavily incompetent people. So if fiat can't be propagated by the words that would push it forward, well, there's one other path. There's only one other path, which is limit the words that people say. That would destabilize the system, right? So they've got to deflect. They've got to defend. Instead of going on the offense and pushing a system, they've got to defend against people criticizing it. And so Michael Schellenberger here talks about how the censorship industrial complex remains fully funded and active, even after all the Twitter file stuff. So all the Twitter file stuff that came out and showed collusion between government entities and a real systematic censorship system has just morphed like slime. You know, one of the things I always describe about the political system is that it's a lot like, and especially the fiat political system, it is a slime, right? It's hard to get a nice punch in on it because it's not firm. You know, Bitcoin at least is a firm structure, a very crystalline psychological machine that you can intellectualize very easily. And if you want to try to punch it, you can, right? Bitcoiners don't run and hide. They'll take the punch and counteract. Oh, it's only 21 million. You can change the supply, right? Well, not exactly, right? So Bitcoiners engage at every level with actual debate and actual arguments. Slimy systems, on the other hand, just absorb the punch and morph into something else, right? They morph into something completely different. Oh, by the way, there's a new Star Trek Picard show out. I was a big Next Generation fan. Now, the first two seasons of Picard didn't watch because I heard they're just a terrible disaster. But the third season, this new season, is really like a Next Generation retro redo nostalgia show. So I've been watching it. It's great. And the enemy in it is these slime people, right? Just slime people. And you can't punch them, you can't hurt them because they're made of slime, right? You try and it won't go anywhere. So I've always thought of this, and I came up with this image years ago when someone was describing Pierre Trudeau's father, or sorry, Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, a Canadian, was describing. He goes, that's the problem with that political legacy, is that they are slime. They will ooze into one area or the other, depending on what serves them best. There's no principle. There's no formal doctrine. It is just power and move slime to wherever you need it, and it's going to be fine that way. So the censorship industrial complex has slimed its way into a new place. And Schellenberger is pointing that out, that since the Twitter files, it's just morphed into something else. It's the same system. They're just trying to hide the tracks and hide the systems that have been uncovered through the Twitter files. So here's what he says. But this shows that the leaders know they are guilty of violating the First Amendment and are trying to sweep away their tracks. This is a big victory for free speech, and we need many more of them. LFG. So what he says here is, crucially, the agency appeared to remove references to domestic threat actors as purveyors of weapons, MDM. I forget what that is, MDM. The updated page now refers to foreign actors only and no longer makes reference to other domestic-facing programs. Last June, the advisory board recommended that CISA should work with and provide support to external partners who identify emergent informational threats and find ways to mitigate false and misleading narratives. The group worried about how to strategically approach MDM and the government in the current discourse. The current discourse was a reference to the furor over the Disinformation Governance Board, which by then was being likened to an Orwellian ministry of truth. After an outcry, Mayorkas, I think it's a person involved, had to pause its work and asked two top Washington lawyers, former DHS security chief Mike Chertoff and former Deputy Attorney General Jamie Gorelick, to weigh in on the legitimacy of the board. Within weeks, the lawyers issued an urgent interim finding it's not needed. They then issued a final report in August affirming the disinformation board should be abolished. So Schellenberger goes on to give credit to the people who have done this. This was all based on a Matt Taibbi article just published about how this is going on, right? About how this is happening. So that fiat messaging and the let's say limiting of debate, right? The censorship part is only one piece of it. There is a whole other thrust that comes. So the actual people who are tasked with promoting this stuff and pumping it up like Yellen failing. So you get one reaction, which is censorship, but you also get the other one, which is narrative broadcasting and narrative propulsion, let's say, pushing narratives into the marketplace so that people help propagate them themselves. And when it comes to that, you get a very interesting stuff that has come out about this axis of evil. So we've talked about this a few times, how you get talking points that become widely disseminated very quickly. And you can see the telltale signs of information laundering and narrative control in it. The one we've got now is axis of evil. So everything that happened between China and Russia this week, now, again, we've talked about the peace plan that Xi came up with, hokey, right? Not that serious, but it's still something on paper and something to work off of. It's not zero. It shouldn't be dismissed outright, even though it's full of cliches and doesn't really mean anything, right? But here's the talking points that have come out, right? It's all this. Here's Congressman Mike Lawler, right? A Democrat. We are dealing with a new axis of evil, right? So that's one. Then Daniel DiMartino, this is the new axis of evil. And this is from Nikki Haley, who's running for Republican leadership, right? So this is a Democrat and a Republican, axis of evil. Here's another one, Hannity from Fox News. Hannity opens the show tonight essentially berating Biden to launch World War III, accuses him of emboldening Putin if he doesn't retaliate for the drone incident. This is about the thing that happened on the Black Sea last week. China, Russia, Iran, the new axis of evil. Here's another Democrat congressman. Vladimir Putin invaded a sovereign nation and killed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, while Xi Jinping covered up the origins of COVID-19 and killed millions of people globally. This is the new axis of evil. Here's a newspaper. Xi and Putin are building a new axis of evil. I think I didn't copy what newspaper, but it looks like some Western popular one. Here's another one on YouTube. New axis of evil is the headline. So here we have this clearly propagated and pushed talking point that was distributed. Now, I understand you could probably on your own find axis of evil because it was the trademark of Saddam Hussein during the Iraq-USA war 15 years ago. But every one of these people are reading off the same script is what, a lot of people would come to the conclusion of saying. So when it comes to the actual financial system, right, that's where a lot of worry has now gone. Bitcoiners are starting to warn, and this is why predictions are important. This is why people like Chamath, who have been wrong for how long now, right, and are now coming at this by saying, oh, the Bitcoin maxis need to because we're doing the math and we just found out this is all a problem, right? Well, not exactly. Bitcoiners have been saying it for a long time, and we're saying what's coming next, right? And Balaji has been saying it loudly. He says, talking about what is going on with the next few months, right? He says, the Fed rendered many banks massively insolvent. The Fed is printing to cover that insolvency, and they're blocking the exits to Bitcoin. They're rolling out FedNow, which is the central bank digital control system. So he has been arguing with engineers out there saying, who cares if there's no blockchain and currency? Don't get freaked out by the innovation roadmap of the central bank. The effect is the same. It's control. If it is an account that is a master key centralized system, they can take money out put money in, it's the same as any other database. It's whoever's in charge of the keys gets to promote the reality they choose, right? There's no way to counteract it. There is no system other than going inside and talking to the actual person who is writing stuff in a database. They might get it wrong, they might make a mistake, who knows, right? And that control exists, and that FedNow is coming as a settlement system means that this stuff isn't going away, right? And Balaji says, is this intentional or emergent? Is it lawful evil or chaotic evil? It doesn't matter. It's happening, right? And that's the truth. We don't have to care about who's behind it. Is the Federal Reserve colluding with the propagandists, with the censorship industrial complex? It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. We don't need to wait around to check for receipts, as Chamath is apparently telling us we need to do, right? We need an inclusive system, and it's got to be for the world, and it's got to be this way, and Bitcoiners need to calm down, and we're just finding out all this now, right? We're not just finding out all this now. This has been there for a long time. Balaji cites Matt Taibbi, who from years ago had it right in a Rolling Stone article calling it the Great American Bubble Machine. Balaji again talking about, is it intentional? Is it emergent? Is it chaos? Where is this evil coming from? It doesn't matter. He says they're closing the exit to Bitcoin while printing trillions. It's the devaluation of the dollar, a stealthy sovereign default. FedNow launches in July. Total financial control. Right? So that's what we're up against. That's what we're up against. And the reason why we talk about the reason why we call this show The Breakup even, right, is because American brainwashing has been successful in its time. And I think there's a reason why you want it. Like, my kids are born in the United States. I tell them to be proud to be American all the time, right? I'm always saying these are things that are great about being American, and I let them know, right? I don't want them to be embarrassed about being American because of the Fed Reserve or the history of Iraq and the things that the global American hegemonic system did. It's not that I'm omitting it. I'm still saying there are many reasons why, as Americans, you can be proud. And I believe, and I'm bullish on America. I'm not going to go away from that. I'm not bullish on USA Inc., but I'm bullish on American people. Now, they might have to move to El Salvador to realize their dreams, right? They might have to move elsewhere. You might have to actually disassociate the territory of America and the governance structures of America with the people in order to get where we're going. That's on the prediction models of Bitcoiners. We've been saying that for a while, right? That's in our math. We've been saying that. We've been predicting that might be the case. We hope things end earlier, but that's where we think, it's important. So it really just does come down to wondering and getting Americans, and this is the breakup part, what side are we on? Are we the good guys or the bad guys? More and more Americans are realizing they're on the bad guy side, right? And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And the reason we're on the bad side is not because American people have some evil streak in them. It's none of that, right? It's the psychological engine that is the economy, anchored in the US dollar, that has created all of these unintended consequences around the world. Well, some unintended, some intended. But the world we live in today is a reflection of the financial instrument that propagates the economy, right? The actual predictions. And that's why I go back to the research. You can't actually do predictive research on the fiat system anymore. As I mentioned at the start of the show, everything Chamath did 15 years ago when he was leverage trading for the Bank of Montreal is garbage. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't predict anymore. It's all garbage. All research before 2020 from Wall Street is garbage. Throw it in the garbage. It doesn't mean anything anymore because the system itself and what it's driven by, the dollar, is really corrupted. The system is not the integrity is lost. And you can go right back to what Murray Rothbard said about John Maynard Keynes, and you can start to see this was a prediction made even earlier, right? Even earlier about where it would lead us, right? And this is what he says. He goes hard, right? He goes hard. So let me say, and this is from Jordan Schachtel, who's already a confirmed speaker at Bitcoin 2023, May 18th to 20th. So here's what Jordan says. To sum up Keynes, and this is Murray Rothbard on Keynes. To sum up Keynes, arrogant, sadistic, power-besotted bully, deliberate and systematic liar, intellectually irresponsible, an opponent of principle, in favor of short-term hedonism and nihilistic opponent of bourgeois morality in all of its areas, a hater of thrift and savings, somebody who wanted to liquidate the creditor class, exterminate the creditor class, an imperialist, an anti-Semite, and a fascist. Outside of that, I guess he was a great guy. So, look, everything that America is manifesting outwardly now is exactly what comes from the inside of our psychological engine propagated by what Keynes created. We are manifesting what was sown and planted 80, 90 years ago. And Murray Rothbard saw it then. This isn't math we're dealing with anymore, right? It's not math. We are not in the realm of math. We are in the realm of assessing reality and predicting where it's heading, right? That's the world we're in. It has nothing to do with math. There's numbers, no math. That's the big problem here. We teach finance and we teach all of this stuff because there's numbers involved, that it's math. It's not math. It's psychological propagation. Again, why Bitcoiners find this time that we're in grounding even is because we got it right. We predicted this stuff. So when Chamath says tamp down on the Maxi stuff, what do you mean tamp down on the Maxi stuff? Stop being right? You can't do that. You can't stop being right. You're going to be right. If you got it right, you're right. And Murray Rothbard has basically predicted the orientation of the system from 90 years ago. Not math, not math. He has talked about what incentives would lead us to. And he got it right. He got it right. Just like Tur got it right 10 years ago. And just like Chamath continues to sit there and go, oh, well, I mean, my math says we need more Chamath, right? It's not going to work. Chamath is not going to work, right? Math is not going to work. You need to actually look at predictions and you need to know why they were made, when they were made. Now, I'll make a prediction, right? I'm going to make a prediction before I go to my children's dance lesson. And that is that, did I actually get the right one? Here, let me go back and get it. And this is from Vivek Ramaswamy, who I'm still negotiating with to get to Bitcoin 2023. I think I'm going to get him. I think you can expect to see him there. But let me confirm first. I had him confirm before he announced he was running for president, by the way, and the presidential thing has made him a little less accessible. But that's okay. We like Chamath. We get it. When people run for president, it takes up some of their time, right? We want to get as many presidential candidates at the show as we can. So where the heck did I put it? Oh, here it is. Yes. Okay. So he was on Daily Wire with Candace Owens yesterday. And so he's on Daily Wire with Candace Owens yesterday. And he says, you can only be an outsider once. I will do what the other GOP candidates appear afraid to even say. And he says, dismantle the climate cult, first of all. 8-year term limits on federal bureaucrats. Shut down worthless government agencies. Annihilate the drug cartels. No CBDCs. Declare independence from China. I mean, look, even Trump, when Trump went after DeSantis the other day, even Trump, I think, understands that the way Vivek is playing this means you can't just punch him in the face like you can DeSantis, right? You can't. He had to call him young Vivek Ramaswamy. I thought it was, the way Trump said it was a compliment, young Vivek Ramaswamy. Indeed, he's coming at this with a whole new frame and looks like he's making contact on the slime system. The way he is throwing these punches, if you do them fast enough, you'll hit the slime because it can't ooze from one place to the other and it can't slime about, right? If you put the whole fiat system in the box that Vivek is describing here, right? The climate cult. Well, the newest play to get rid of Wall Street predictability altogether, right? If you thought the Chamath stuff was bad about useless research and predictions from 10 years ago, well, this is even this is even worse what's coming. If you want inclusiveness in the financial system as a matter of fiat declaration, like the ESG veto that Biden used this week, well, you're going to get a much more perverted system, much more perverted, much crazier, right? And so right away, that's part of the box you have to put fiat in. Term limits on bureaucrats. Well, this whole thing about American prestige complex, right? The fiat preferred career path, which is go to an Ivy League school and then bounce between federal regulators and the industry you're regulating and make money from everybody and have a title and milk the title forever. All of that stuff is part of the fiat industrial complex. It's part of the military industrial complex. It's part of the censorship industrial complex. It's part of all the different systems that fiat has polluted, which don't allow America to propagate into the future properly, right? Which makes all of our research useless and all of our predictions based on a fiat worldview totally useless, right? You need these huge interventions to steer the ship. Shut down worthless government agencies. Well, we've been saying that here forever. That one of the main problems of America is that we left the World War II war machine running. We never shut anything off, and a big part of that is the bureaucracy. Like DC as an entity should not be as big as it is. American federalism and the states themselves having sovereignty is heavily infringed by having a huge DC. And that's a prediction I make all the time. And I think Vivek is going to be right about this. I think one of the most important things we can do is turn the keys off Washington, D.C. Just shrink it. It'll be more accountable. You'll have higher IQ people in these positions, right? That'll happen. The drug cartels, I mean, it just has to happen. America's getting torn apart. The cities are disgusting. We got major drug problems, right? Everything that Bukele is doing in El Salvador needs to be copied in America, especially the brainwashing of the criminals, right? That is a good thing. And then the declare independence from China, I like the framing of it. I think he's got the perfect framing. It is about an independence from what's going on over there. But more importantly, it's about American manufacturing. And I don't mean the old types of factories. I think we're going to rebuild American manufacturing in Mexico, in other places, and it's going to be even more local to America, 3D printing. But consumption will change, right? The fiat world of massive consumers is a big part of the change Americans have to go through. Americans have to get skinnier, basically. It's and I'm not here to fat shame anyone, but the amount of consumption that goes on in America is one of the things I think the enemies of America are betting on, for which America will fail, right? That we can't adjust to consuming less, and therefore we'll do anything to keep consuming the way we do, including selling our freedom, right? I believe Americans can slim their consumption habits. I think we can change. I think we can go back to what it was like before, not as brain dead consumers, as thrifty people, right? Thrifty people. And Americans were the thriftiest for a long time. They were a savings culture. That was taken, deliberately taken, as we've discussed many times on the show. All right, that's the show for today. Let's see. I got to get up to the stuff. Vivek and Bobby, part of me thinks Bobby might switch parties, which I would love to see. I would love to see Bobby, because they're going to kill him they're not, I don't want to say it. Be careful when you say Kennedy is getting killed, right? I'm not predicting they will murder him. But what I am saying is they're going to run the machine on him so hard that he's not, I don't know if he can surface in the Democrat Party. It would be great. I just don't think he's going to have the chance. So weirdly, the old QAnon fake rumor that Trump would get JFK Jr., who's not dead, and he would come out of not being dead and become the vice presidential candidate. That's like a total QAnon belief, right? It might be something similar in the end. It might be RFK getting tapped by. I would love to see cross-partisan lines like that in American politics. It's how we're going to get out of this mess. It's how we're going to break the psychological isolation of the different facets. So imagine a Vivek Bobby candidacy. I mean, I would be into that. I would be totally into that. Or a Trump one. There's other people out there. Let's see here. The things I'm most proud of with the USA are the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. Go one. Hold on with rock and roll. I agree, but you got to go one step back. It's jazz. Rock and roll is just jazz. It's just a different form of jazz. We don't call it jazz. You're not going to list it on your music as jazz, but it comes from the instant um, composability and spontaneity of American music. The real American music begins with jazz and then changes over time. But in my world, I see it all as jazz, including hip hop, including everything else, in the sense that it is music had never been done that way. It had never been played spontaneously and that creatively ever before. It was always played off of a sheet. It was always pre-scripted. It was always about performing it the same way repeatedly. And the jazz guys figured out how to do that differently, and it totally changed the world. And I continue to believe, more than anything, American music is its greatest invention. I think if America collapses, this is a Ken Burns saying, if America collapses in 1,000 years, what they're going to talk about in America is baseball and jazz. And by jazz, I mean all of American music. So the truly American music begins with jazz. And so I agree with you 100% that that is the thing that makes me proud of American music. But I would put Bob Dylan in the same category as the great jazz musicians in the history and canon of Americana music, right? And it was one of my favorite things is that Bob Dylan, when the Beatles became popular, he went on tour in Europe with a great big American flag behind him and just said, "This is American music." He's, like just annoying stuff, right? He was one of the original trolls, Bob Dylan, by the way, if you don't know that. Yeah, blues. I mean, look, I just roundly throw it all into jazz because it's the beginning of American music, and there's all things that come out of it, but the idea of real time, full of energy, anyone can understand it. Grateful Dead, yeah, I'm a huge Grateful Dead fan. Love Grateful Dead. All of that comes from that stuff. Yeah, and blues is pre rock and roll. Yeah, and blues, blues has a lot of connections demographically, instrument wise, to the early jazz stuff too. Bobby may be the only one who could survive as a nonpartisan. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think he would. I think he would transfer to the Republicans easily. Is what I mean. I think he would be recognizable to Republicans, and they wouldn't have trouble. So Trump has been stealing Vivek's clothes. Yeah, he has been, Daniel. Yeah. Hey, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Trump is an artist, right? No doubt about that. That's how I always described Trump to people in the early days. I would always say when people would be like, I said, guys, look, fiat decadence, and I would say this. This is what I would say in 2015 because this is how I understood the world already as a Bitcoiner. These are the predictions that I'm mentioning. In 2015, I described Trump the following way. This is verbatim. This was like my canned, this is what Trump is really about speech that I would give to anyone who's like, Trump, but you think Trump's going to win? And I was like, yeah, do I think he's going to win? I'll bet you whatever. I'll bet whatever you want that he's going to win. I would say that in 2015. I was betting anyone, any takers. I'd give them straight odds. I was so sure. 1-1, right? And so the way I predicted it at the time was this simple. I said, fiat decadence has confused us about art. It's made us think that art is all aesthetic. It's not. It's not all aesthetic. There's more to art. Art should be difficult. It should be challenging. It should make you think. It shouldn't be pleasant all the time. It shouldn't just be like, oh, that's so beautiful. Wow, right? There is art like that, but that's not art. Just like not all art has to challenge you, right? There is a realm of aesthetic art, but art includes the challenging and the disruptive and the antagonistic and the annoying and the difficult to look at and the things that make you feel uncomfortable. That's art. That's also art. And what I said from the start with Trump is you might not like the aesthetic part, but this is an artist. It's not a politician. It's not a TV guy, even though the TV guy relates to the art. And I would say, remember what he wrote, the art of the deal, the art of the deal, right? So this is an artist, and you might not like the creation that he's coming up with, but it's making you think. And I'm betting on the artist here. I'm betting on the artist and their capacity to challenge people and because that was what Trump was after every time. He was trying to scratch exactly where it would drive people nuts, right? And Steve Jobs, that was his famous quote, right? That he would say when Steve Jobs walked out of Xerox and stole the mouse, right? When he stole the design for this thing, which is what he did. They let him in. They said, "Oh, what's that?" Right? And he's like, "Oh, great." He walked out giggling. Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Right? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. And it's true. It's true. And so if Trump steals some good art and it's Vivek's policies, good for Trump. Let him steal the Bitcoin ideas. Right? Vivek is a Bitcoiner. Don't forget. All right, team. Peace. See you tomorrow. No, not going to do a live show tomorrow. Not doing a live show tomorrow. I don't think. But I'll let you know on Twitter either way.